when we look at the types of cyber extortion attacks that are coming across, you're addressing a lot of those points with what you're doing. Where are organizations really underestimating their risk?
I think there's a few really critical areas. One is live video and voice calls. I think the assumption is if I see somebody or I hear them, it's real. And the reality is we know deepfake enabled impersonations for video and audio cues are completely unreliable. So attackers can join those meetings and pretend they're executives, and we've seen that happen. The second thing is internal messaging platforms. The assumption is an internal chat is safe because it's inside a firewall, and that's not true at all. We've seen compromised accounts, insider threats, that's a hotbed. The third, and probably the biggest one right now, is metadata exposure. Assumption there is that encryption solves everything. Even encrypted channels leak metadata. Attackers use that for profiling and timing attacks all the time. That is a big one. There's a few more: supply chain and vendor communications, crisis communications. The assumption there in emergencies, our communications are safe. The reality is attackers use urgency to exploit and issue fake directives all the time. They know where those are and they take advantages of them.
Welcome back to IT Visionaries. I'm your host, Chris Brandt. Joining me today is Christine Gadsby, Chief Security Advisor at BlackBerry. Christine is a cybersecurity leader with over 25 years of experience, a former CISO, and was named 2023 Cybersecurity Woman of the Year. She advises governments and major enterprises on keeping communications secure and reliable. Today, we're talking about why consumer messaging apps aren't actually secure, how groups like Salt Typhoon quietly infiltrate telecom networks, and what organizations need to do to prepare for AI-driven deepfakes and impersonation. Christine, I'm excited to dive into all of this with you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you. I mean, first of all, I'm just really curious as to like what's going on with BlackBerry these days. But I think this topic is super important right now because, you know, some of the things that, you know, I mentioned in the intro, we're seeing so much of it right now out in the wild. So I'm really excited to hear about what you guys are doing to, you know, protect your customers from some of those challenges. But before we get into that, what is BlackBerry today?
That's, as you can imagine, a question I get asked often.
I'm sure.
I usually come across a couple of things. One, I have this deep love for the handset crowd that kind of follows me around and wants to know, are you making a phone again? And, I have this one old phone. Yeah, I'm with that crowd. I have a box. I don't know how many I have. I have a box of phones and I love them. But I think it's important to note, like, BlackBerry over its history, it's always really been the same company. It's sort of changed in how it's operated and it's changed in how it's delivered services, but the core functionality is the same as it's always been. We have been since, for the last 40 years securing, the most, intelligent and critical and, security conscious customers' conversations. It looks different now. That security functionality that was in the handset, again, aside from the keyboard, if you pull that out, that is just software now. And that's the capabilities we have as a company. That part hasn't changed. We're still securing all of those customer communications as our top priority.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing, sort of the last place that BlackBerry's sort of left was in the government work, because I think, they liked the security of the platform. And we saw a lot of those hanging on for a very long time there. I mean, could you talk about like what it is that like separates the government and just even like executives and, like corporate espionage and, that's all a thing too. I mean, could you talk a bit about like what separates that from sort of standard business as usual that everybody else is tackling? Yeah. And I'll keep this kind of high level because I think we can probably dive into some of the spaces, but government and critical infrastructure, and I'm going to add into their highly regulated, which is terms that I use for like banks and hospitals. And those are our core sort of, who we're speaking to when we talk about these topics. Those places, people, things need to think about infrastructure and conversations and their security differently than I do when, say, I send, a group text to my friends and we're ordering coffee or something, right?
So there's a few key points that come into that. And that is first, identity assurance. There's things like integrity and authenticity we have to think about. Resilience against impersonation, which I'm sure we'll get into. Confidentiality beyond encryption, because that's another thing that I think has a big buzzword in the last few years that we've definitely had to work through. The availability of whatever services those companies, people, governments are providing under attack. So that's another thing. Resiliency goes into that availability of that under attack. You can think about that a lot with critical infrastructure, power, water, any of those things that we need for survival, and our government. And then there's compliance and non-repudiation. How do you prove that you are who you are in those communications? So I think at that level of communication, the bottom line is really that everything has to come out to equaling encryption, identity verification, integrity, resilience, compliance. So it's about kind of the trustworthy and the continuity. It's not just kind of secrecy. So there's a big difference there, again, when we look at how, government and critical infrastructure and the highly regulated need to operate than, my girlfriends do when we're meeting at Starbucks or whatever. So.
Right. Well, and do you, I know one of the big things around, like government work in particular, and sometimes with enterprise and corporate work too, is that, like maintaining the history of communications and all that. Is that a big part of what you do as well, or how does that work?
Yeah. When you go back to sort of the history of communications and being able to document who's done what and where, yes. That is more important, I think, in some instances than in others. And in some, the non-repudiation, meaning, I am Christine and I sent you a message and you can prove that it's me and you can prove that it was Wednesday at 4:00. That is critical for some instances of government, especially. But it's it's one piece of that kind of little puzzle.
Yeah. Well, so like what, obviously you're talking to more than just government and a select few very large companies. I assume that this is becoming extremely valuable for just every enterprise, really, because when we look at the types of cyber extortion attacks and things like that are coming across, you're addressing a lot of those points as well with what you're doing. Where are organizations really underestimating their risk?
Wow.
Let's not go overall. How about just communications?
Okay. Right. So if we just narrow that down to a communications discussion, I think there's a few, I've probably got, a few really critical areas. And I think one is live video and voice calls. I think the assumption is if I see somebody or I hear them, it's real. And the reality is, we know deepfake enabled impersonations for, video and audio cues are completely unreliable. So attackers can join those meetings and pretend they're executives. And we've seen that happen. And so I think the second thing is internal messaging platforms. The assumption is, an internal chat is safe because it's inside a firewall. And that's not true at all. We've seen compromised accounts, insider threats. You name it, that's a hotbed. The third and probably the biggest one for me and what we're working through right now is metadata exposure. So, the assumption there is that encryption solves everything. And even encrypted channels leak metadata. So who, when, how often, and attackers use that for profiling and timing attacks all the time. That is a big one. So I think, you've got some other sort of, There's a few more: supply chain and vendor communications, things like that, crisis communications. So again, the assumption there in emergencies, our communications are safe. The reality is attackers use urgency to exploit, and issue fake directives all the time. They take advantage, they know where those are and they take advantages of them. So I think those are just a few things. There's more, but when we narrow it to communications, those are the things that I'm sort of, the attack channel of just communications in general.
Yeah. You mentioned sort of the AI, how it's playing into all of this, and I think the rise of AI and how much it's changed and how much has been accomplished in just a few short years. Like 4 years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation probably, right? But now it's like I mean, I've seen those deep fake videos you're talking about, and I've heard just the voice ones, and they're like so spot on. I mean, you really can't tell the difference in most cases, and they're only getting better and better every minute, and it's like and in real time too. So how do you, like, just starting there, like what are the best ways to protect against those sorts of things?
Well, I mean, I think it's different for every company. I think it's different for every industry. And I think the first thing that you really have to stop and look at is, what is your attack surface in general? So if you're I guess, an electricity provider, and you're a bank, or you're a hospital, or you are a government, those are different sorts of use cases. Again, those are not me and my girlfriends sending coffee orders. Those are definitely different sort of things that you have to pay attention to. So first, I think when you're evaluating kind of the risk profile that you have in any of those scenarios, you have to first map your high risk communication scenarios. So where do decisions happen that move money? Where do decisions happen that grant access or change operations? Or what channels do your executives and your finance and your operations use for urgent approvals? Those are kind of the crown jewel conversations. And so those are the things that I really always urge companies or even IT leaders to really sit down and think, because when I've helped some map those things out, and they're always really surprised, I think, when you think about it, not from just generally an IT perspective, but from a risk communication scenario. And I think second, you have to identify the trust assumptions. So do people in your company or your government or whatever assume video equals identity? Do they trust calendar invites all the time? Or, assistant routing without verification and things like that. So there are blind spots that are known. And are you trusting those, or are you understanding what they are? Identity assurance. So how are you verifying who is on one end of a call, a chat, or an urgent message, and who is on the other end, knowing that that is a big attacker endpoint? So, is it just a login, or do you have some kind of session bound verification? Is the answer just trust the messaging app? Because that's a huge red flag. Look at your metadata exposure. Who can see who talks from where, how often, and when. Are your collaboration tools you're using capturing that metadata and sharing it? Authors, timestamps, that is the most valuable thing to attackers, especially at Salt Typhoon level, is, getting that metadata so that they can use it. And then review executive and your administrative assistant or operational behaviors. Are they using, the consumer messaging apps, personal email, things like that, SMS messaging, text, just for speed? Because those are always bypassing most security controls you have. So that's I guess the things that I would look like, that I would want to know and look at are probably at least those top five.
It really challenges the idea of some early thoughts on how to do verification, right? I mean, I know that, I need to change my password. Well, I talked to him on the phone, so I know it was him, right? I mean,
right.
So I mean, that's going to be a hard thing to ferret out, I would imagine, in all cases, especially when, like you mentioned, when there's some sort of crisis happening in conjunction with that, right?
Oh, absolutely. And attackers are smart. They know that's the best time to get you. I mean, there's tons of modeling that, you can look this up online, tons of modeling at threat actor level that are smart, and they spend time sort of tracking movements. They can even make profile maps that know when you're in crisis, because they've tracked your movements long enough to know when that pattern changes that you're likely in crisis. They will wait for that. And then they will, go after the attack when they feel like it's going to be the most successful. They're very, especially in like the Salt Typhoon, they're very patient.
Yeah. Well, I've had conversations with a lot of security professionals around sort of because there's sort of a distinction between, like the cyber extortion, crowd that's attacking you, and sort of the advanced persistent threat crowd that attacks you, which tend to be more like nation state actors and things like that. But then there's this discussion about, like, well, are some of these cyber extortion events really just camouflage for more the nation state actors to do things in the cover of this crisis too. Are you seeing anything like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point. And so the answer to that, unfortunately, is yes. I wouldn't be being honest if I didn't think so. But I think really to understand sort of the root of how all of this operates is really to go back to Salt Typhoon, because it's fascinating. If you haven't done any research or thought through the how this stuff happens, I mean, we really have to think about Salt Typhoon. So their nation threat adversary, right? They are 5 years old. I mean, incredible, right? And so even in their first, 2020, 2025, but we just look at the history there, they sat dormant for a good 2 or 3 years while they were just building out their weaponry. From the 2 year time frame that we know their existence, they have been able to go from what we knew was, 9 or so telcos here around the last election, where we, as a country admitted that, hey, we know these telcos are compromised, to huge amounts of scale. We know they're in 80 countries operating, and have somewhere around 200 telcos now, we believe, that they have infiltrated, and somewhere around 600 different companies. That, if you look at that and you look back at the history, and I did a little bit of this research just for fun. I kind of went back a while ago for a conference and looked at sort of the history of how attackers have advanced in, especially to our critical infrastructure. This is absolutely game changing. Whether or not you want to talk about it in AI, or you want to talk about, their, how they're doing it or what, but the real big thing we have to keep in mind from sort of the group activity is their core mission is espionage. It's not disruption. And that's really how we have changed and how we've had to think about here around communications. Their goal is long-term intelligence gathering. It's not damage immediately, right? And their focus on telecom, they're not after telecom. They're focused on that intelligence gathering to focus on government and critical infrastructure, and then to intercept those sensitive conversations to exfiltrate the data. So that's a different game. And we also see from them is they're not a one-person machine. They have saturated across so many continents and built up, so many other sort of, they're building kind of an army of this. So yes, I mean, we can't ever assume one is acting alone. That's just kind of how I think about it. I don't ever assume one is acting alone. That's just, we can't do that anymore.
This episode of IT Visionaries is brought to you by Meter, the company building better networks. Businesses today are frustrated with outdated providers, rigid pricing, and fragmented tools. Meter changes that with a single integrated solution that covers everything: wired, wireless, and even cellular networking. They design the hardware, write the firmware, build the software, and manage it all so your team doesn't have to. That means you get fast, secure, and scalable connectivity without the complexity of juggling multiple providers. Thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Go to meter.com/ITV to book a demo now. That's meter.com/ITV. Let's dig into the Salt Typhoon more, because I mean, obviously, you mentioned him a couple times here, and I think that it's been a big story in security for sure. And I don't know that necessarily a lot of people who aren't in the security crowd, are familiar with them, but could you talk a little bit about, like, where did Salt Typhoon come from? I mean, you kind of hinted that they're sort of nation state, but like, who is Salt Typhoon? Where are they coming from? What's the story there? So they are nation state. And, they've been attributed to several nation state locations. So we're not, I think the big thing about where they're coming from should tell us something. They have started with the telecom network critical infrastructure because it is so strategically vulnerable. And I mean, if you really sit back and think about this, I have a slide somewhere on a presentation that we put this together, and it was fascinating. You've got, when you pick up a free messaging app, it doesn't matter which one it is, and you type up a message and you send that across this telecom network, regardless if you're on Wi-Fi on your device or not, it still goes through the telecom infrastructure. And then it goes through all these hops to get to the other end of that receiving person. And that can be up to 7 or 8 changes. Every single one of those changes hits a different kind of technology, whether that is from device to,
a cell phone tower outside your window, all of those things are susceptible to interception. You got man in the middle attacks. You've got, at one point, it's routing through an SS7 technology. The SS7 technology is from the 1970s, right? And the SS7 technology is responsible for SMS messaging, routing, all these important things that has a message to go from one to the other. So why, if we look at why the group Salt Typhoon sort of started nation state, it's incredibly, it's almost like attacker art, I guess, if you want to think about it. They realized that the telco networks and critical infrastructure they run on are strategically just valuable, gold mines, because it's the backbone of everything: national security, economic stability, operational continuity. If you think about it, everything we do goes on that network. So it carries voice data, signaling traffic, all these kinds of things that if they were able to monitor and intercept it, they can manipulate it. So at scale, that is incredibly valuable to them. It's incredibly valuable because it's weak. We've got, you add on to that, like if I'm building an ice cream sundae, sort of the cherry on the top of that is 2 and 3G networks still exists in many parts of the world. It's a global problem. And then, for us as security, we can't go back and blame the telcos because they don't own all of that infrastructure. They own like one part of that little tiny puzzle. So, it is why it's so valuable, is just because it's kind of a gold mine.
Well, and to put a finer point on that too, I mean, I think telco over the years has sort of grown, with the focus on growth versus security, and taking old technologies and shoving them in. So I think that creates a lot of challenges. And you mentioned 2G and 3G networks, and I know that that's a big attack vector too. I mean, could you speak to why 2G and 3G, and if you see your phone bouncing over suddenly to 2G or 3G, why you should be concerned?
Well, first of all, you don't have a choice. Yeah. So that's, it's not fixable. You don't have a choice. When I get onto an airplane and I go from here to, I work in the Asian region a lot. And, some of those are the older regions of parts where 2 and 3G are still running around. And, you don't have a choice. And there are, as technology grows, you've got double-sided thoughts on that. First, for every technical advancement we make, we leave technology behind, right? It isn't possible to update everything at the same time.
Right.
I think why 2 and 3G, to give you the layman's perspective of why 2 and 3G is so tough right now, is there's known exploitable vulnerabilities. So, as a security practitioner, our job really to think through this is to, when there is a vulnerability being exploited and we know about it, we all refer to that as known exploits. And guess what? Attackers know about it too. Everybody knows about it. If it's impossible to fix it, meaning that some of those 2 and 3G technology pieces aren't fixable. So think about that. You've got all of this stuff running around. It's so old and out of date that the fixes just don't exist.
Right.
And you have a supply chain in there where even if you could fix it all, you got to fix part 1, you got to fix part 2, because that fixes part 3 and then part 4. And if you pull one of those out, the whole thing's vulnerable. So it makes it nearly impossible. Now, on the other end of that, you've got these groups like Salt Typhoon who are very well aware, because again, publicly known, things that are exploitable, networks that aren't patchable. They have been known, and this is, again, sort of the nerd out fascinating piece, but they have been known to take their exploits and to go into these older places of technology and to sort of test them and to run like these crazy test cycles. And when it breaks, they use AI to sort of pull out that breaking piece and then to fix it. So they're basically doing, pen testing in the 2 and 3G old networks to figure out what they can get across with silently, because again, then there's no way to know they're there. So they're using it for target practice, to lack of a better term. And then they're sort of refining and then trying to bring those out to sort of shoot them out into, the 4 and 5G networks where there are more security controls and more, abilities to detect that they're there. But, again, this is a gold mine for them because it's not a solvable problem. At least it's really difficult. Maybe it's not unsolvable, but it's difficult.
Well, and I know, not too long ago, we heard about a bunch of stingray networks that were all around like the United Nations and things like that. And to for the people who aren't familiar with that, I mean, could you explain actually what like stingray devices are and how that works against 2G and 3G?
Well, there are a group of devices. So there's a group of known devices that you can actually just go buy on the internet right now. So let me take a step back and share a little bit about the reality of how devices in that category work in general.
Yeah.
So if I am sort of sending you a message from a free messaging device from one device to the other, and I would like to intercept that message, there is tons of, things you can go out there and buy, hardware pieces that will just sit and wait for that kind of data. And to make it worse, there's actually services you can buy, Espionage as a service, where I believe it's around $30 a month. You can actually hire this outsourced company to monitor these devices for you. You still have to get your own device. And they will just give you the results back. So to make this, really easy, you've got, low-hanging operating costs from a device perspective. You put that up against where these signals are flying around, and they're all obvious. You've got a device that can connect to it, and you've got a service you can pay $30 a month. And it's, again, I have a slide on this. It's always surprises people. They're advertising them. So it's like they have marketing campaigns and they're competing for business. It's like just the world that exists around this is quite crazy. But it's super easy and it's low hanging fruit. And so, you've got businesses making money on this left and right.
Yeah, no, I mean, the vulnerability as a service or attacks as a service business is a huge industry, and seeing a lot of that rising up there. So obviously, like cell phone communications can be intercepted, and that's a big issue. And like even the things we think are secure, like I'll just get on my cell phone and it's encrypted, and like unfortunately that encryption can be broken. So like when the underlying medium is not secure, and I think that's kind of where your sweet spot comes in here, right? It's like if the underlying medium that all this messaging is communications traveling across is not secure, how do you go about making it secure?
Oh, good. Well, I mean, a few things, right? We need to understand that is the first thing. And what you just said is the first thing that we have to accept is that our networks have been compromised. They've been being compromised for a long time. I just read a really interesting report actually this morning when I was doing some reading, is that we should actually consider them hostile at this point. So you've got this group, incredibly intelligent group of people. You've got governments, right? FBI released a report not too long ago that said this. You've got tons of really important security researchers saying this. You've got telcos admitting this publicly. It's not fixable, and have that all kind of come together and assume it's hostile. So I think we have to start there. So I think every government, every customer that or every company that cares about this, that has that, again, go back to that risk profile and what communication are you trying to secure? We really have to go back to assuming that's hostile. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you've got to figure out what you're going to do about that, obviously, right? I mean, I'm biased and as a security person in secure communications for so long, the first thing you have to realize is that, again, encryption does not mean safety and security. Encryption means that maybe a message from A to B maybe is garbled, maybe, right? And you have to stop there and ask yourself, what is that level of encryption? Is it NSA approved and audited encryption like we have? Or is it encryption meaning, someone is maybe trading ciphers at Starbucks? Do we know? We don't, right? So that is the other thing, is you really have to say, what is the encryption? And then you have to ask yourself sort of, what is the risk profile of the metadata that's being floating around? I'm constantly talking to governments about, when you're sending messages, what applications are you using? Are you SMSing over text message on personal devices? Or, have you looked into, getting a secured messaging system where your IT or your own, government or company or regulated business owns that administrative function? Because the thing that I think they forget and that we forget a lot is that anybody can go to the App Store and download those applications. So anybody can get that free messaging app and create a user profile. And that could be whoever they want it to be. And then you can start messaging whoever you think that, you want to talk to. So I think that's the second thing is we really need to look at, do we need to control that administratively? For us, our secure messaging application allows administrative control. So you don't get a messaging spot on there unless you're invited. So that allows you to have certainty of who you're talking to has been authenticated in a system. So that's, the first thing you kind of have to do is protect the metadata of your users and then look at the messages that you're sending and figure out a plan on how to kind of protect those as well. Not a one-stop shop for sure, but definitely those two things.
Yeah. And I think, you kind of are hinting at it a little bit too in this with the idea that encryption isn't enough because an attacker can send an encrypted message too. And getting back to where we started with sort of that identity verification piece of it, it's the combination of both those things that who you're talking to and that communication channel is secured, right?
Yeah. And that is really the biggest misconception. If I looked at the entire security industry right now and looked at that question of what's the biggest misconception that any organization has about messaging apps or how they're communicating in general. And that is, if it's encrypted, it's secure and trustworthy. And again, it only protects the content in transit. It doesn't protect the identity of the sender or the integrity of the interaction. Attackers can compromise devices, read messages before they're encrypted. They can impersonate executive stills, using stolen credentials or deepfakes. And they can then again exploit that metadata. Those, we know metadata is flying through the air, as we speak. So the who, when, how often, that's for surveillance and profiling. And then, those consumer grade apps lack identity verification. They lack, compliance and auditability, so you can't go back and prove who is who. And then the resilience under attack, they're dependent on the public infrastructure also. So lots of misconceptions, especially around encryption.
Yeah. Well, and you add in there resilience, because oftentimes when we talk about security, we don't always throw in resilience into the bucket because if everything's down, then everything's really secure, right? Because you can't, if you're not communicating, it's all secure, right? But I think, resilience is a big piece of this. Can you talk about how that plays out?
Yeah, resiliency is something that's really interesting. And it's really, resiliency probably is the thing I think probably over the last maybe 6 or 7 months, we've really started to focus on. As we've seen a lot of these sort of global things happening, whether that's a terrorist attack here, we've seen government, we've seen nation state military bombings in other nation states. So I think as that risk escalates for what resiliency looks like, the questions sort of have to come out and say, okay, if your infrastructure is that vulnerable, what will you do if the rest of it goes down? So we go back to that telecom story, right? We pick up a phone, we make a call, or we send a message, or we need to communicate. That string of supply chain is, 20, 30 vendors wide, maybe. I use the term vendor loosely. It's not 20, 30 connections of technology and technology spots and vendors wide. When you pull one of those out, they all go down. So looking from the resiliency standpoint is if it's under attack, it's not functional. And then pulling into the picture, the very, stealthy way Salt Typhoon we know is just embedding themselves, and they're just being so patient and they're just collecting all of this data. We know that's to disrupt critical infrastructure. It's not to go for the telcos, right? They're after the big targets. And so that has a lot to do with resiliency. So it is something that, the industry in general has spent probably, it's been a big topic of ours in discussion for probably the last good 6 to 8 months or so. Yeah.
Well, and I think when we look at, cyber extortion events, ransomware and things like that, for example, I think, when you look at them, at the heart of them, they're denial of service attacks, right? So,
agreed.
That's a big part of it. We're talking about Salt Typhoon, and you said they're getting embedded all over the place, and we've kind of known about them for a couple of years, but they've been around for 5 years. So that speaks to the sort of stealth of their operation. And with some of these advanced persistent threat kind of nation state actors, the guys who are kind of really sneaking in and staying there to, commit acts of espionage and things like that, they are really, really hard to find, right? And so how do we know that they're not already in everything we're doing? I mean, like, are there ways for enterprises to say, like, I'm not sure we're entirely secure here? I mean, that probably should be the default position anyways, right? But yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, we always want that to be the default position. But the reality bubble that I live in, especially with larger enterprise and in government, security conscious, is that we don't always live there. We want to, and hey, it would be great if we did. But of course, there are really early signals that organizations can, sort of look towards that may give them a clue that something is happening. And I think the first thing that I want to go, and this is something that I've seen recently a lot more, is unusual timing of requests. So if you notice someone asking for sensitive information at odd times, late nights, weekends, or rushing for you to answer something, that can indicate something is off. Again, I've seen a higher rise in those sort of patterns. And then also the repeated patterns there. So repeated questions about the same project, people, timeline, especially from an individual who wouldn't need that level of detail. That can always give a signal to information gathering from a compromised account. And then another thing we're seeing that I actually just saw some data on this week is unexpected sort of looking into or accessing of older archived files. If someone, and I'm saying someone like they're authenticated and they're, who they say they are, let's just pretend that they're not, because this is how it happens. If you think someone suddenly wants access to this really old file or past project, that could be someone, kind of gathering information to map sort of the history. Strange behavior around communications, colleagues avoiding official channels, preferring to use personal email, or messaging apps in general when you have a policy that says don't have that, or requests to share files sort of outside of normal platforms. Can you send that to my Gmail? Always a red flag. And the answer to that is no, you cannot. And there are some external things too. I read a report a couple weeks ago about strange behavior being seen that led to a really large exploit, which was somebody was really interested in all of the sudden knowing things about your building remodel. And, like where you're headed with that next week. So that's kind of interesting things. But then there's kind of the basic low hanging fruit. Calendar invites from people you don't accept, don't accept those or you didn't know. Unknown names that you see when, you have a file that was accessed, changes in document properties where you're like, hey, I thought I was supposed to approve that. How am I off the approval chain? Organizational structure questions. Who's supposed to approve this from someone, a name you don't recognize? There's lots of sort of red flags, but it really is around behavior. It's around the things that you see that you just don't think are some things that are there. So yes, there are some things you can watch for, but again, the reality is those adversaries are also really smart and they are really good at laying low. So it's a challenge anyway.
Yeah. Well, and some of what you're talking about makes me think of the idea that, like, we spend a lot of time talking about ransomware, but really financially, the really big one is business email compromise that I don't think we have people talking enough about. And I mean, I don't know if you want to just explain a little bit of what business email compromise is and why it's so pervasive and problematic.
Yeah, and there's many ways that BEC or business email compromise, there's many ways that can take effect. But I'll tell you of a scenario that I know that happened. And so hopefully this will help. So a company A, they're going off and doing their email thing, and they sent out a bunch of emails. An attacker had compromised their system. So they were already compromised. they were able to get in and, compromise what looked like a PDF. So this business attached that PDF, sent it out to another business. That other business opened it and clicked on the link because it looked legit and it was actually from the person they thought it was. So, if you have a trusted sort of business partner, let's just say they're, I don't know, your dentist. I'm going to make this up for lack of not giving the company away. But, your dentist sends you an email and says, hey, here's this thing, click on it so you can make your payment. You make your payment, your dentist was compromised. So while the email actually came from your dentist, the attachment was compromised. So BEC can take form in that. It can take form in any kind of business, like we're going to pretend to be one business and we're not, and we're going to embed an exploit into it. So it's kind of a sneakier attack. But the reason why it's so successful is because it takes advantage of trusted relationships.
Yeah.
You're getting an email from someone you trust. Even the most security conscious person in the world is, oh, I know Bob. Bob and I have worked together for 20 years, click, and then they're owned. So it's a really, really, really sneaky way because, again, it takes advantage of your sense of trust. And attackers are starting to use it more and more and more. And then, again, you click on that email and you forward it on to someone else, and they've just now changed, they're now getting a compromise. And when they compromise that BEC, they can get into your Outlook and get all your contacts. And so then they're taking all the contacts and they're re-forwarding that email out for you on your behalf. I saw a really, really, really sneaky one that they got into the Outlook and they disabled all of the notifications for outgoing mail, and they hid themselves in the Outlook file and wrote a rule that said every time they sent a mail to move it to this really strange folder at the bottom. So they were basically just living in this Outlook undetected. It was crazy. So again, trusted relationships mean big crime.
Yeah, well, and I, what I've seen too is, with I think procurement will buy for the whole organization, but they're not necessarily the ones working with the vendors. So when they get an invoice, that says, hey, you owe us $10,000 or $100,000 or $1 million or whatever, they don't sometimes think twice about it. It's like, oh, I get big bills from people like that all the time. I'll just pay this out. And that's why it's such a big financial impact, I think.
Yeah, and that would have been a better example than the dentist. It's someone you trust, right? Someone you normally pay. And attackers are really smart and they know your patterns, right? So they know that you always pay this guy on the first. So if they just get in and email you before the guy that you pay on the first does and move his mail to the garbage, they're going to, you're going to pay them instead. It is really a big business.
And then they call up and you haven't paid me in 3 months. It's
exactly. And you're like, yes, I did. I paid you.
I paid you $1 million.
Exactly. And your money is now gone.
Yeah,
exactly.
Say goodbye. IT Visionaries is powered today by Meter because every great business relies on great networks. If you're a network engineer, you know how critical uptime, control, and visibility are. Too often, you're stuck troubleshooting issues across fragmented systems or locked into legacy solutions that don't scale. Meter reimagines networking from the ground up. Their full-stack solution from ISP procurement to security, routing, wireless, and beyond gives you deep control and the performance you need. No more piecing together providers or worrying about bottlenecks. Just seamless, scalable connectivity built for today and tomorrow. Big thanks to Meter for sponsoring. Visit meter.com/ITV to book your demo now. That's meter.com/ITV. It's that trust and identity piece is so important, but that also relies on what you were saying before too, about attacking sort of the metadata and all the information you can learn about an organization just plainly from the metadata, right?
Yeah. I think those are that would be my second thing that I think we're really, as a community, we're even still learning. But metadata is incredibly valuable. Messaging apps aren't free. If you're using a free messaging app, that's how they're making money, is by the data they're collecting on you.
Right. And so you're kind of used to it anyways.
You just don't know what's happening. Yeah. And I would encourage anybody, this is fascinating. If you're using one of these free messaging applications, go look at the metadata. You can ask them for it. They all give it to you. Look at what they're tracking. It's incredible. Your name, your address, your phone number, the version of software you're running on your phone, the last location you were at. They can do thumbnail names for the files that you're sending across, all of your contacts. They know what groups you're in for messaging, and they're selling all of that. So you've got two problems with that. You've got One, they're selling it. And so every purchaser now has your metadata and they're all attack vectors themselves,
Yeah.
right? So whoever's buying it is an attack vector. And it's floating over, insecure, all these insecure channels anyway. So you've got a bunch of nation state actors that already have access to all that, and it's being sold and available, to be stolen, or stolen, compromised, whatever. So you got double-sided in my mind how I think about it. But you've also got AI in there, and if you go look recently, I don't remember when this was, a month ago or so, Meta announced that AI, their own AI chatbot between their tools, is going to collect that metadata, and you cannot opt out. So you don't even have a choice now. If you're choosing to use those, all of that metadata will be available and sold. So we've got a challenge in that as a community of, the metadata that's free and available, and then AI making great use of that metadata for attackers. Unfortunately, it doesn't benefit us, right? It benefits the attackers.
Well, and I mean, I think you bring up a really interesting point. I mean, like, at some level, these attackers don't even have to do a whole lot because they can just buy the stuff they want from Facebook.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Or they can get one of those fun black boxes and intercept it and then pay a service $30 a month. It's almost so easy that it's laughable at this point. So it's a tough one. I mean, for us, it is what we do every day, but not everybody does this every day. So, I'm never surprised, but I think a lot of people are.
Well, and I think AI, it really changes. I mean, because we kind of talked about the Deepfakes piece of it already, but I mean, beyond that, I mean, just the phishing emails we used to get that were like really bad broken English with like goofy looking logos and stuff like that. They are not that anymore. They are perfectly crafted, messages that you can't distinguish. And not only are those kinds of things, rising with AI, but the persistence of the attacks, because they can all be automated and like have intelligence applied to the attack patterns and things like that. So there's that, and also just the ability of AI to like discover new vulnerabilities too, whether it's just social engineering vulnerabilities or software vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah, and I think you just that really is the point. I think the one thing that AI is doing is just making the barrier to entry cheaper, right?
Yeah.
It's making them more efficient. And you are correct. One of the things that I've seen lately is AI tools programmed to run to fix AI tools. So we've got nation state actors running, again, in the zones of the world, they're doing target practice. You've got them taking these AI bots and you've got them running attack scenarios until they break, and then having another AI step in while the one AI tells them it's broken to fix the attack chain. And then they've got a third AI bot on top of that, taking that attack chain and finding more vulnerabilities to chain to get it to do what it's not doing. So you've got cheaper, faster, better, smarter in a broken zone of, what we know again is not patchable things. You can take that and sort of like peanut butter that across a lot of industries, not just, what we're talking about right now. But that is the reality with AI. We've got defense too. The security community is doing a ton to sort of combat a lot of the, the AI growth on the espionage side. But the reality is it's their game. So it's an arms race at this point. And I think as the security community starts to try to develop better tools on it, we will have a better defense. But right now we just have to be smart, and just understand that that's the attack surface. It's pretty big.
Well, I mean, it's interesting too, because we talked to so many companies about AI and they're really not getting the value out of it. But it does seem like the cyber attacking community is realizing a lot of value out of AI right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they can also operate under channels. They don't necessarily tell us what they're doing either. So yes, they
can
are
afford it too, because they're making so much money, right?
Exactly. They're a well-funded machine for sure. Yes, exactly. That's a fair point.
So we're looking at, like you just mentioned, this is a huge attack surface we're talking about here, right? What can, I mean, like, where do we start? Because I mean, there's like technology issues, there's infrastructure issues, there's people issues, and probably the people issues are going to be the hardest one to solve for. But like, how do you where should people start, and what approach should you take?
I think if I'm an IT leader in any company right now, I'm kind of starting with the basics. I'm going back to what we talked about earlier of mapping out what my risk profile is. I think leaders in general underestimate this all the time. It never fails when I sit down and have a conversation, not just about communications, but security in general. Like, what are you doing? How can I help you think through your risk factors, whether that's people, whether that's your building, whether that's your IP, whether that's, the products you're making or the products you're selling. What never fails to me is the models that they're looking at aren't wide enough. They're not tall enough. They're not deep enough. So that starts with understanding your attack surface from end to end. And that means all of those categories, because you're right. It's a lot about people. And that, for us, we have a product called Ad Hoc. So it does critical event management in emergency situations for people. It basically helps you get your people to the right place, during a situation used all over the world, many governments. And one of the things we see with them is when they go to try and sort of, deal with this crisis, whether it's a bomb explosion or a bridge collapse or, you name it, it's been used for it. They're always so thankful on the other side of that because it's handling the people problem. So I think if you look and sort of model that from a threat perspective, it's one way. But companies really need to understand that. If I give you one place to start, it's model effectively. Know your people and what their risks are. Are you a global company? Do you have offices all over the world? Or is your one office in San Francisco and you have 8 floors that you need to account for, or 20 people? Do they work remote? Does everybody come into the office 5 days a week? Sort of that sort of thing. But then again, knowing how your communications are. Are you a publicly traded company? Because if you are, you have a lot more communication things you need to think about, right?
Yeah,
from an accountability perspective.
And reporting and regulatory stuff. Yeah.
Exactly. Fiduciary duty is really, 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 really critical. And I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to companies who are like, and then all of a sudden their eyes get really wide because they think about having to disclose, to the public. And so I think, again, going through those critical steps of documenting your real attack surface and knowing what that is. And if you don't know how to do that, always reach out to me. There are plenty of people that will help you do that. Then start to look at, okay, how do we clean up where our channels are? Looking at what your sort of availability for an attacker is. Do you do business in Asia? Are you doing business only in North America? There's lots of things that have to do with sort of what the risk profile looks like, and it's different for every company. I always tell executives when I talk to them, there's a huge difference in how to make a risk profile effective if you are a G7 government or if you are selling donuts, right? You got a big space in between there and you can fit in there anywhere, but your attack vectors are not the same and your risk profile is not the same. So make it for you. Don't take your neighbors and copy it because it won't be right.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think that security mindset's a really hard thing to embed in, because not everybody thinks in terms of security, especially, people who, were engineers who started big companies and, they want to focus on engineering issues or whatever. They don't want to think about this stuff.
It's the total truth. It is the total truth. And really, unless you're kind of like, us and I am so blessed. I get to be the security nerd that works in a company that is all about security. And awesome. It's the first word in every meeting is security. I joke about that here internally. Everybody laughs at me, but it's the truth. So not everybody gets to live in my world every day. And when you live in the world every day, you think about it every day. But if you're right, if you're a high powered engineer and you have a startup and now you're global, you haven't thought about it. And why would you?
Yeah. Well, and I think, that's an important point because I've seen so many companies talk about, we need to find security people. We need to find security people, but no good security people don't want to go and work for like a widget company. They want to do it like exactly what you explained. It's like, I get to come to a place that's security focused and I talk about security all day long. I mean, so like, it's companies like yours that absorb all the good security people and that, it's not much left for everybody else, right?
Well, yes, but I do think that's changing in just how we operate is as a community too. So I do think there's a lot more lately. I'd say probably in the last maybe 18 months or so, there's a lot more community focus around it is an arms race, and we really do have to be helpful to all things. A lot of us are taking a much more thought leadership approach.
Yeah.
And not, trying to necessarily sell something as much as we are just trying to make the community better itself. You see a lot more willingness to share because really at the end of the day, it is us against, crime.
Everyone.
Really.
Yeah.
It is really. It's security thought leaders against criminals. That's really what it comes down to. So I think there is a lot more willingness to sort of be a helpful provider regardless of where you're at. I know, I have a law. I mean, those of us that have been doing this a long time, we go way back. There are tons of us that are, we can't go anywhere without saying, hey, hello, how are you? And that has changed over the last probably 5 years. Now we all sit and have coffee and talk, and talk about the important things in the world. I think you saw a lot less of that 5 or so years ago. But I do think it's a really important thing for us to remember is that we are all here for the greater good of, defending our nation and other great nations against criminal attacks.
Yeah. And I think, at the center of this, it's like, if it's confusing to you, you can get help. Go just ask for help, find it. It's out there, right?
Absolutely. I'm always on, I'm on LinkedIn and I answer all of my LinkedIn messages.
Wow.
And a lot of people I do, and a lot of people that I know do. And I have, always been successful in finding someone to help, even if it's not me, with a security question, because I do think we do need to be serving our community that way. It's really important.
And if people wanted to reach out to you on LinkedIn, what would be the best way to do that?
Yep. I'm Christine Gadsby. I'm at BlackBerry. I'm the vice president and chief security advisor. So if you look me up, I don't think I'm hard to find. You can absolutely just send me a message and I'll answer. And again, if I can't help you solve something, I will find the right person. Perfect.
So tell me, we've been talking about, all the things that BlackBerry does, and you mentioned a few of your products and things like that. Could you kind of give us a rundown of the core of BlackBerry's offering right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the secure communications side of our business, we have 3 products. The first one is our unified endpoint management, which is the what I call the soft chewy center of the old device. So that is all of the software inside the device that used to manage phones, manages them now for governments and companies and hospitals and banks. And that just allows you to have a remote workforce and set security policy on personal devices. So that's the bring your own device sort of version of the BlackBerry.
Right.
Really important, because the other thing you do not want is personal device data messing with your business device data. That is a recipe for disaster. And I think one of the biggest things we see in the exploit world on mobile is people bringing their personal phones that are full of, side channel exploits in, they're in the business, and they're connected to the IT systems and passing all that stuff right through. Lots of reasons. That's only one of about 20. But that's that product. It does a lot of other things too. But then secondarily is AtHawk, our security events management system, our critical events management system that allows companies to, like we talked about earlier, manage where their people are and instruct them how to get to safety in a critical event. Lots of companies, governments use this for things like chemical plants where they might be around substances that are dangerous, where they would need to alert people to evacuate. It integrates with lots of different systems for that matter, like bells, notification systems, alarms, things like that. And then for disasters like, bombings or bridge collapses or earthquakes or tornadoes here in the South, it allows you to notify and then track your employees and make sure they're all safe. And that is a really important product. We've seen a lot of governments start to adopt that. We just covered the 47th ASEAN Summit, and we did all the security through that product for that event. So notifying dignitaries where to be on time, things like that, and tracking their whereabouts and notifying them was all through that product. And then most probably relevant to this conversation is our SecuSUITE product, which is NSA audited and approved encrypted voice and text and file sharing application that takes care of the NSA encryption part for what you're sharing, And then also we hold then the administrative parts. The metadata is controlled by you or us. So you're not able to, again, your metadata is not floating around everywhere. And that is called SecuSuite. And that is BSI certified, which is German security certified product, which is the only one in the world currently to be certified by the BSI for secure communications. And has a lot of other security certifications that have taken a very long time for us to get and invest in. And that is one thing you get with us is, we've been investing in those security certifications for many years. So that's the three main on this side of the company in the security communication space.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, obviously BlackBerry's been around for a long time and you've had such a security focus for such a long time. You've got a lot of heritage in that area. So it's interesting to see, the evolution of BlackBerry, kind of still focusing on some of those core competencies there too, which is interesting.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've been with the company for a long time and I've been able to be helpful, I hope at least, in some of the transitioning points that we've gone to from, being inside the handset into transitioning into being a software-based company. But again, it's really, the really great part about this company is the message never changes for us. It's just how we do it sometimes looks different, but it's always been our top priority is to secure communications. Why I joined the company and why, a lot of us are still here is that, really that's the driver of why we come to work today has never changed. We're always here to make sure that our governments, hospitals, banks, can communicate safely.
Well, hey, that's a great mission, and keep up the good work. Is all I can say, because I think the only thing I've seen lately is just more and faster kinds of attacks, and like anything we can do to effectively defend against some of these things coming at us. I think it's super important, very challenging, but super important work for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, Christine, thank you so much for being on. I mean, just tons of great insight here. I really appreciate your perspective on everything. It's been great talking to you about this. I really thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me. That was fun. Thank you.